People like you don't belong here." Madison Cartwright poured vintage wine down Dean M. Ritchie's face at the American Vanguard Gala. The red liquid dripped as hundreds of phones recorded. Dean stood still, wine staining his suit. "I belong here, Mrs. Cartwright. Secretary Thompson invited me personally." "Liar!" Madison smashed the crystal glass at his feet. "Security! Remove this fraud!" Her husband Robert and other defense executives surrounded Dean like wolves. The crowd jeered. "Probably snuck in through catering," someone laughed. "Another diversity hire," another voice added. Senator Hayes shouted, "Madison's right. We've lowered our standards too far." Dean pulled out his phone, typing a brief message while wine still dripped from his chin. The crowd's laughter grew louder, interpreting his silence as defeat. Madison stood triumphant, basking in the applause of her peers who believed they had just witnessed the humiliation of an interloper. None of them noticed the slight smile that crossed Dean's lips as he hit send. They were too busy congratulating themselves to realize they had just started a war they couldn't win. 3 hours earlier, Dean M. Ritchie had entered the American Vanguard Gala through the same gilded doors that had welcomed presidents and billionaires for half a century. His Tom Ford suit was impeccable, but deliberately understated. No flashy watches, no diamond cufflinks, nothing that screamed wealth. He moved through the marble foyer with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. The bartender's eyes had tracked him with barely concealed suspicion when he ordered sparkling water with lime instead of the champagne everyone else clutched like liquid status symbols. Marcus Williams, dressed as catering staff but watching everything with the trained eyes of a former Navy SEAL, noted how the security guards checked Dean's invitation 3 times. "Must be a mistake," one muttered to another, studying Dean's face as if trying to match it with their mental database of who deserved to breathe this rarefied air. Dean heard it all, absorbed it all, said nothing. He had learned long ago that silence was a weapon the privileged never expected from those they presumed powerless. Madison Cartwright swept past him in a cloud of Clive Christian perfume, her crimson gown worth more than most people's cars. She didn't see him. People like Madison never saw people like Dean unless they were serving drinks or parking cars. She was holding court near the ice sculpture, regaling Senator Hayes and other defense contractors' wives with a story about their recent vacation to their 4th home in the Hamptons. "The problem with this country," Madison's voice carried across the room, "is that we've lowered our standards. Now anyone with a rental tux thinks they belong in rooms built by real American dynasties." Dean sipped his water and watched her the way a chess master studies a board before making the move that ends the game. He pulled out his phone and typed a message to his CFO. "Initialize positions on Cartwright Dynamics. Cerberus timeline moved up." Marcus caught his eye from across the room, a silent question in his gaze. Dean shook his head almost imperceptibly. Not yet. The Washington Post's Elena Rodriguez was interviewing the Secretary of Defense near the champagne fountain when she noticed the subtle dynamics playing out. As a Latina journalist who'd fought her way into these spaces, she recognized the familiar dance of microaggressions. She watched Dean navigate the room with interest, noting how conversations stopped when he approached, how hands tightened on purses, how security seemed to shadow him despite his valid invitation. "Excuse me, sir." A young server approached Dean, not Marcus, but another staff member who'd been watching nervously. "I need to verify your invitation again." It was the 4th time in 20 minutes. Dean handed it over with the patience of someone who'd endured this ritual countless times. The server scrutinized it as if expecting it to reveal itself as a forgery. "Nexus Defense Technologies," he read aloud, confused. "Never heard of it." "You will," Dean replied quietly, taking back his invitation. The server walked away, whispering to his supervisor about the suspicious guest in Sector 7. Dean noticed Madison Cartwright watching now, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows raised in disdain. She whispered something to her husband Robert, who looked over and laughed, the kind of laugh that had echoed through plantations and boardrooms for centuries, the laugh of those who believed their power was birthright. The cocktail hour was waning when Madison Cartwright decided to make her move. She glided across the ballroom with the predatory grace of someone who'd never been denied anything, her entourage of defense industry wives trailing like expensive shadows. Dean stood near the VIP section, studying a display about Cartwright Dynamics' 60-year partnership with the Pentagon, a partnership that had made them untouchable, or so they believed. "Excuse me," Madison's voice cut through the ambient jazz like a blade through silk. "This area is reserved for C-suite executives and their guests only." She positioned herself between Dean and the display, her body language screaming ownership of not just the space but the very air within it. Dean turned slowly, meeting her gaze with the kind of calm that comes from facing down far more dangerous predators than socialites drunk on inherited power. "Madison Cartwright," he said, not a question but a statement. She blinked, surprised he knew her name. "I'm Dean Ritchie, CEO of Nexus Defense Technologies. I believe my invitation grants me access to all areas of the gala." He reached into his jacket pocket, producing a business card with elegant simplicity. Madison took it between two fingers as if it might contaminate her, her eyes scanning the minimal text with theatrical skepticism. "Nexus?" She laughed, a tinkling sound devoid of warmth. "Is that some kind of startup? Maybe you should try the entrepreneur meetup at the Marriott downtown. This is the American Vanguard Gala. We're talking about companies that shape national security, not whatever app you're peddling." She made a show of examining his card more closely before letting it flutter to the marble floor. "CEO?" she repeated mockingly. "Everyone's a CEO these days. My pool boy probably has business cards calling him CEO of Chlorine Management." Marcus Williams shifted position near the catering station, his hands steady despite the rage building in his chest. He'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan, had saved Dean's life twice in corporate wars that Madison Cartwright couldn't imagine, and now watched his friend and employer endure humiliation with the grace of a saint. Elena Rodriguez had moved closer too, her journalist instincts detecting the story brewing in the tension between these two figures. "I understand your confusion," Dean replied, bending to retrieve his card with deliberate dignity. "Not all power announces itself with yesterday's achievements carved in marble. Some of us prefer to let our work speak for itself." He slipped the card back into his pocket, his movements unhurried. "Controlled. I noticed the display mentions Cartwright Dynamics is awaiting renewal on the Perseus defense contract. $2 billion, if I recall correctly." Madison's face flushed beneath her perfectly applied makeup. "My husband's family has been serving America's defense needs since before you were born. We don't discuss business with—" She paused, letting the silence fill with implied meaning. Unexpected guests. Senator Hayes materialized at her shoulder, his florid face already marked by his 3rd bourbon. "Everything all right here, Madison? Security can handle any disturbances." "No disturbance, Senator," Dean replied before Madison could speak. "Just introducing myself to Mrs. Cartwright. I'm sure we'll be seeing much more of each other soon." He pulled out his phone, typing quickly, "Cerberus protocol ready for execution. Await my signal." The message went to 12 executives across 3 time zones, each controlling a piece of the chessboard Madison Cartwright didn't even know existed. The confrontation escalated when Madison's voice rose to performance level, ensuring everyone within 50 feet became her audience. "You know what I find fascinating?" She circled Dean like a prosecutor addressing a jury of her peers. "How people like you always manage to slip through the cracks. Affirmative action, diversity quotas, whatever program got you that ill-fitting title of CEO, it's destroying the meritocracy that built this country." The room began to quiet, Guests turning from their conversations to witness the spectacle Madison was orchestrating with the skill of someone who'd weaponized privilege her entire life. Dean remained motionless, his face a mask of professional composure even as Madison's words grew more venomous. "Let me guess," she continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "You grew up in some inner-city sob story, got a scholarship to a state school, and now you think that makes you equal to people whose families built the defense industry? My husband's grandfather personally knew Eisenhower. What's your pedigree? Who vouched for you to be here?" Marcus Williams had moved closer, his body coiled with barely restrained tension. He caught Dean's eye, ready to intervene, but Dean gave the slightest shake of his head. Elena Rodriguez had her phone out now, recording everything while pretending to text. She recognized the choreography of this humiliation. Madison was performing for her crowd, establishing dominance through the kind of public degradation that would go viral within hours. "You want to know my pedigree?" Dean finally spoke, his voice carrying a quiet authority that made several nearby guests lean in. "My grandmother cleaned houses for families like yours. My father died in Vietnam, carrying ammunition for officers who looked like your husband. My mother worked 3 jobs to put me through MIT, not a state school, Mrs. Cartwright, though I doubt you'd know the difference between excellence and entitlement." Madison's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "MIT? How wonderful for you. Did they have a special program? Lower the bar a little?" She turned to her growing audience, playing to their prejudices like a maestro conducting a symphony of supremacy. "This is exactly what's wrong with modern America. We've confused participation trophies with actual achievement. This man probably runs some minority-owned front company that gets federal handouts, and he has the audacity to stand in a room built by real American success." The crowd murmured, some in agreement, others in discomfort. Robert Cartwright had joined his wife, his presence adding weight to her performance. He stood behind her, his hand possessively on her waist, his gray eyes examining Dean like he was appraising livestock. "Madison's right," Robert's voice boomed with the confidence of someone who'd never been contradicted. "The Pentagon's been forced to work with these diversity hire companies. It's weakening our national security. Companies like ours with actual heritage and capability have to compete with whoever can check the right boxes." "Interesting perspective," Dean replied, pulling out his phone again. "Speaking of the Pentagon, you should know that all defense contracts over $50 million now require approval from the Technology Integration Board. Are you familiar with that board, Mr. Cartwright?" Robert's face showed the first flicker of uncertainty. Dean continued typing. "Execute Cerberus, all positions, no delays." Madison snatched a champagne flute from a passing server, not Marcus, who maintained his cover, and held it high. "A toast," she declared, her voice commanding attention, "to maintaining standards, to keeping American defense in capable hands, to knowing the difference between those who belong and those who simply aspire." She looked directly at Dean as she said the last word, her contempt radiating like heat from a forge. "You know what your problem is?" Madison stepped closer to Dean, close enough that he could see the calculation behind her perfectly made-up eyes. "You don't understand the natural order of things. Some people are born to lead, to own, to matter. Others are born to serve, to follow, to fade into the background where they belong. The suit doesn't make you one of us. The title doesn't make you our equal. You're playing dress-up in a world built by your betters." Dean's phone buzzed. A message from his CFO. "All positions secured. Controlling interest achieved. Awaiting final authorization." He looked up at Madison, then at the crowd of defense industry elite who had gathered to watch her performance. "Mrs. Cartwright, you're right about one thing. There is a natural order to things. But nature has a way of correcting imbalances, of tearing down what's rotten to make room for what's strong. You talk about heritage and legacy, but every dynasty falls. The only question is whether it crumbles slowly or collapses all at once. Madison's face twisted into something ugly beneath her perfect makeup. "Are you threatening me?" Her voice cracked like a whip across the now silent ballroom. "Security!" she called out, her tone shifting from imperious to alarmed. "This man is harassing me. He's making threats against American defense contractors." Two security guards materialized from the crowd, their hands moving to their radios as they approached Dean with the careful momentum of professionals who knew the eyes of Washington's elite were upon them. Dean raised his phone slowly, making no sudden movements. "Gentlemen, I'm a personal guest of Secretary Thompson. Perhaps you should verify before creating an incident that ends up on tomorrow's front page." The guards hesitated, and in that moment of uncertainty, Madison struck. She stepped forward and slapped Dean's phone from his hand, sending it skittering across the marble floor. "Don't you dare name-drop your way out of this. People like you always have some story, some connection you've manipulated." Marcus Williams abandoned his cover, moving through the crowd with purpose but not panic. He retrieved Dean's phone, his military bearing suddenly evident despite the catering uniform. "Sir," he said, handing it back to Dean, then turning to the security guards. "Mr. Ritchie is indeed Secretary Thompson's guest. I suggest you verify with your supervisor before this escalates further." Madison laughed. Harsh and brittle. "Oh, he brought muscle. How perfectly stereotypical. What is he, your bodyguard, driver, or just another fraud playing dress-up?" The security guards were speaking rapidly into their radios now, trying to verify Dean's claims while managing the growing crowd of gawkers. Elena Rodriguez had pushed closer, her phone capturing every second, her journalist instincts screaming that this was more than just another gala dispute. She could feel the electricity in the air, the sense that something fundamental was about to shift. Robert Cartwright stepped forward, his presence commanding the attention of the room's power brokers. "Enough of this charade," he boomed, his voice carrying the authority of 60 years of defense contracts. "I don't care who you claim to know. You're disrupting a private event, harassing my wife, and making threats against established American businesses." He turned to the crowd, playing to their biases with practiced ease. "This is what happens when we lower our standards, when we let anyone with a printed invitation pretend they belong in rooms where real decisions are made." Senator Hayes joined the chorus, his bourbon-flushed face radiating indignation. "I've served on the Defense Appropriations Committee for 12 years, and I've never heard of Nexus or this supposed CEO." He addressed the growing crowd like a politician at a rally. "This is obviously some kind of infiltration, maybe corporate espionage. Someone call the FBI." The crowd began to murmur, their voices building like a storm. "Fraud!" someone shouted. "Imposter!" came another voice. "How did he even get in here?" Madison fed off the crowd's energy, her confidence swelling with each supporting voice. "You see? Everyone knows you don't belong here. This is embarrassing for you, isn't it? Being exposed in front of everyone who matters?" She grabbed another champagne flute from a passing tray, holding it like a weapon. "Why don't you leave with whatever dignity you have left? Go back to whatever hole you crawled out of and stop pretending you're something you're not." Dean stood in the eye of this social hurricane, his calm seeming to infuriate Madison further. He looked at his phone, where messages were flooding in from his team. "Acquisition complete. Trading halted on Cartwright. Pentagon notification ready." He typed a simple response. "Hold for my signal." Marcus positioned himself between Dean and the increasingly agitated crowd, his body language warning anyone who might think of getting physical. Elena Rodriguez pushed through the crowd, her press credentials visible now. "Elena Rodriguez, Washington Post," she announced loudly. "I'd like to know why Mrs. Cartwright feels comfortable making such inflammatory statements about a fellow guest. Are these the values Cartwright Dynamics represents?" Madison whirled on her. "Another diversity hire heard from. Of course you'd defend him. You people always stick together, don't you?" The ballroom erupted. Madison's last comment had crossed a line that even some of her supporters couldn't defend. Arguments broke out between different factions, those appalled by Madison's blatant racism and those defending her right to speak the truth. Robert was shouting at Elena, threatening to call her editor, to have her fired, to sue the Post into oblivion. Senator Hayes was demanding Dean be arrested for trespassing, corporate espionage, and probably terrorism. In the chaos, Madison lunged forward and grabbed Dean's phone from his hand again. This time, she raised it high and smashed it against the marble floor with all her strength. The crack echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. "There! Now you can't pretend anymore! No more fake calls to fake contacts!" She was breathing hard, her careful composure completely shattered, her hair coming loose from its elegant updo. But the silence that followed was different. Every phone in the room began buzzing, pinging, alerting simultaneously. The massive LCD screens that usually displayed corporate propaganda flickered to life with breaking news alerts. Elena Rodriguez gasped as she read the notification on her phone, immediately switching from recording to typing frantically. "This can't be real," someone whispered. "Check Bloomberg," another voice urged. "It's on Reuters, too." Robert Cartwright's phone rang with the specific ringtone reserved for board emergencies. His face went white as he answered. Madison was still holding the champagne flute high, ready to throw its contents, when she saw her husband's expression change from confusion to horror. "What do you mean we've been acquired?" Robert's voice cracked. "That's impossible. We're a private company. The family has controlling interest." The screens around the ballroom synchronized, displaying the same headline. "Breaking. Nexus Defense Technologies acquires controlling interest in Cartwright Dynamics. Pentagon contract under review." Madison's hand trembled. The champagne flute tilted. "No," she whispered. "You're nobody. You're nothing." Dean looked at his broken phone on the floor, then at Marcus, who handed him a backup device. "Mrs. Cartwright," Dean said, his voice cutting through the chaos with surgical precision, "you're about to learn the difference between inherited privilege and earned power." Madison's hand moved as if in slow motion, the champagne arcing through the air. But it wasn't champagne. In her rage, she'd grabbed the wrong glass. The vintage Chateau Margaux 1995, a gift from a defense contractor worth $8,000, splashed across Dean's face and suit. The ballroom fell silent. Every camera was recording, every eye was watching. The wine dripped from Dean's face onto the marble floor, each drop an indictment of everything Madison Cartwright represented. She stood there, the empty glass in her hand, her chest heaving, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her in real time. The wine dripped from Dean's face in crimson rivulets, but he didn't move to wipe it away. Instead, he stood with the bearing of a man who had just been crowned rather than humiliated. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, broken only by the sound of phones vibrating with increasing urgency as the news spread through the financial and defense sectors like wildfire. Madison still held the empty glass, her hand trembling as the magnitude of what she'd done began to penetrate her rage-clouded mind. Robert Cartwright's phone hadn't stopped ringing. Board members, investors, lawyers, everyone who mattered in their carefully constructed world was calling simultaneously. His face had gone from white to gray as he listened to his CFO screaming through the speaker. "They bought the debt, Robert! All of it! Every loan, every bond, every piece of paper with our name on it! They called it in! Everything's due in 24 hours unless we accept the acquisition!" "Ladies and gentlemen," Dean's voice rose above the chaos, steady and controlled, despite the wine still dripping from his chin. "Allow me to properly introduce myself. I am Dean Marcus Ritchie, founder and CEO of Nexus Defense Technologies, the company that provides the AI-driven encryption systems for 90% of America's defense communications." He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, slowly wiping his face with deliberate dignity. every drone strike, every satellite communication, every classified message between the Pentagon and field operations runs through technology my company developed and controls. The main screen flickered again, this time displaying a video connection. Secretary of Defense Thompson appeared, his face grave as he surveyed the scene through the camera. "Dean, I just heard about the situation at the gala. I'm deeply sorry for what you've endured." His eyes found Madison in the crowd. "Mrs. Cartwright, you just assaulted one of the most critical assets in American national security." Dean Ritchie has the highest security clearance in the civilian sector. He advises the Joint Chiefs. His company's technology has saved thousands of American lives. Madison's legs gave out. She collapsed into a chair, the empty wine glass rolling from her nerveless fingers. "But he's just," she stammered, unable to complete the sentence as her worldview shattered, like the phone she'd destroyed minutes earlier. Robert was shouting into his phone now, demanding explanations from lawyers who had no answers, from board members who were already drafting resignation letters. Elena Rodriguez was typing furiously, her editor on speaker demanding she file the story immediately. "This is Pulitzer material, Elena. A black CEO just orchestrated the most devastating corporate takedown in defense industry history." She looked up at Dean, who caught her eye and nodded. Permission to tell the whole story. Marcus Williams stood beside his employer and friend, finally allowing himself a small smile of satisfaction. 45 minutes ago, Dean continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the now silent ballroom. Nexus Defense Technologies completed the acquisition of 51% of Cartwright Dynamics through a series of shell companies and debt purchases. As of this moment, I control the company your family built, Mrs. Cartwright. Every contract, every employee, every decision now requires my approval. He turned to Robert, who had dropped his phone and was staring at Dean with the hollow eyes of a man watching his legacy burn. "Your seat on the board? Terminated. Your wife's honorary positions? Revoked. The Cartwright name on the building? That comes down Monday morning." Secretary Thompson's image on the screen continued. "Furthermore, the Pentagon is launching a full investigation into 60 years of Cartwright Dynamics contracts. Preliminary findings suggest systematic overcharging, preferential treatment, and possible violation of federal anti-discrimination laws in hiring practices. The Perseus contract is suspended pending review." $2 billion, evaporated with a single sentence from a man Madison had dismissed as nobody. "This is impossible!" Madison shrieked, finding her voice in desperation. "We have lawyers! We have connections! Senator Hayes, tell them!" But Senator Hayes was backing away, his political instincts screaming danger. Association with the Cartwrights had just become toxic, and he knew it. I had no knowledge of any wrongdoing," he stammered, distancing himself from people he'd called family an hour ago. Dean walked to where Madison sat crumpled in her chair, standing over her with the wine stains on his suit like battle scars. "You asked about my pedigree earlier. Let me tell you about power, Mrs. Cartwright. Real power doesn't announce itself with inherited names or grandfather's connections. Real power builds itself in silence, accumulates in shadows, and strikes when arrogance makes you blind. You never saw me coming because you never saw me at all. To you, I was invisible, just another diversity hire, another checkbox. That blindness cost you everything." Within 48 hours, the video of Madison Cartwright pouring wine over Dean Ritchie had been viewed 500 million times across every platform. The hashtag Cartwright Collapse trended globally, with the image of Dean standing dignified while wine dripped from his face, becoming an instant symbol of resistance against institutional racism. News outlets ran split screens showing Madison's sneer beside Dean's calm composure, the visual contrast speaking louder than any commentary could. Elena Rodriguez's Washington Post exclusive dominated news cycles. Her detailed investigation revealed decades of discriminatory practices at Cartwright Dynamics. emails using coded language to reject qualified minority candidates, internal memos about maintaining cultural fit, and a 60-year history of board members that read like a Confederate monument. The story she'd witnessed at the gala was merely the visible tip of a massive iceberg of systemic prejudice that had infected American defense contracting for generations. Madison Cartwright was arrested at her Georgetown mansion as news helicopters circled overhead. The charges were assault, hate crime enhancements, and criminal threatening of a federal defense asset. The image of her being led away in handcuffs, her perfect makeup smeared with tears, her designer dress wrinkled from a night-in holding, became the photo that defined the fall of American aristocracy. Her lawyer's statement about it being a misunderstanding was drowned out by the chorus of witnesses who'd recorded every word of her racist tirade. Robert Cartwright's resignation letter was one sentence: "I relinquish all positions effective immediately." The board that had supported him for 20 years voted unanimously to accept it, then voted themselves out of existence as Dean's transition team took control. The Pentagon announced a comprehensive audit of all Cartwright contracts dating back to the Kennedy administration, with preliminary findings suggesting over $300 million in overcharges and fraudulent billing. Marcus Williams was announced as the new chief operating officer of the restructured Cartwright division, now absorbed into Nexus Defense Technologies. In his first all-hands meeting with the 5,000 employees, he promised that performance, not pedigree, would determine advancement. "The old ways die today," he told them. "Excellence has no color. Innovation has no bloodline. From now on, this company promotes based on merit alone." Madison's trial was swift and devastating. The video evidence was undeniable, the witness testimony overwhelming. Dean never appeared in court, letting the evidence speak for itself. She was sentenced to 2 years probation, $50 million in damages, and a lifetime ban from serving on any corporate board. But the legal punishment paled compared to the social execution. Every club expelled her membership, every charity removed her from their galas, every society door that had been open to her for 43 years slammed shut with finality. The Cartwright estate in Virginia, built by Robert's great-grandfather with profits from World War II contracts, was sold to Dean's Foundation and converted into a technology training center for underprivileged youth. The family portraits that had lined the halls for 3 generations were donated to a museum exhibit on the rise and fall of American oligarchy. Madison's children changed their last names and moved to Europe, unable to bear the shame their mother had brought upon a name that had once opened every door in America. Senator Hayes quietly announced he would not seek re-election, citing family reasons. The real reason was that his association with the Cartwrights had become politically radioactive. His recorded comments at the gala about diversity hire companies ended his career as surely as if he'd been caught with a smoking gun. The old boys network that had protected and promoted mediocrity while claiming meritocracy was crumbling, and everyone associated with it was scrambling for cover. 6 months later, Dean M. Ritchie sat for his first major interview since the Cartwright acquisition. Elena Rodriguez had won her Pulitzer for the coverage, and Dean had chosen her for this exclusive. They met not in some corporate boardroom, but in the newly opened Ritchie Center for Technical Excellence, built in the very neighborhood where his grandmother had cleaned houses for families like the Cartwrights. "People ask me if I planned it all," Dean said, his voice carrying the same calm that had unnerved Madison that fateful night. "The truth is, I'd been planning something like it for 20 years, not revenge. Revenge is emotional, wasteful. I planned for justice, for change, for the dismantling of systems that told children who looked like me that they could only serve, never lead." He paused, looking out at the students working on defense technology projects in the center's state-of-the-art labs. Madison Cartwright was just the face of something much older and deeper. Her wine-soaked tantrum was the system defending itself and failing. Marcus Williams, now running the day-to-day operations of the merged companies, had implemented hiring practices that revolutionized the defense industry. Merit-based blind reviews, diverse interview panels, and skills-based assessments replaced the old cultural fit code words that had kept the industry monochrome for decades. "We kept every single employee from Cartwright," Marcus explained in the interview. "But we promoted based on talent that had been overlooked for years. Turns out excellence comes in every color when you actually look for it." "The wine stains came out of the suit," Dean noted with a slight smile. "But the stain Madison Cartwright left on her family name, on her legacy, that's permanent. Her children will carry that shame. Her grandchildren will Google their family name and see their grandmother's face twisted with hate, pouring wine on a man she deemed beneath her. That's not revenge. That's consequence." Elena asked the question everyone wanted answered. "Do you feel sorry for her?" Dean considered carefully before responding. "I feel sorry for the person she could have been if she'd seen beyond color to capability, beyond inheritance to innovation. Madison Cartwright had every advantage: wealth, education, connections. She could have been a force for progress. Instead, she chose to be a monument to prejudice, and monuments to prejudice always fall." The interview concluded with Dean standing in front of the center's mission statement, carved in marble where Confederate monuments once stood. "Excellence has no color. Innovation has no bloodline. Power belongs to those who build, not those who inherit." "The Madison Cartwrights of the world still exist," Dean said directly to Elena's camera, addressing the millions who would watch. "They're in your boardrooms, your country clubs, your children's schools. They smile at diversity initiatives while whispering about maintaining standards. They claim meritocracy while practicing nepotism. They pour wine, metaphorically or literally, on anyone who threatens their inherited throne." But here's what Madison never understood. Power isn't about keeping others down. It's about lifting others up. Every person you dismiss based on their color, their accent, their background, could be the one holding your future in their hands. Every room you enter, ask yourself, am I Madison, blind to brilliance that doesn't look like me? Or am I ready to see power where privilege told me it couldn't exist? Marcus Williams added his own closing thought. "We didn't destroy Cartwright Dynamics to celebrate. We transformed it to demonstrate. Change isn't coming, it's here. The question is whether you'll pour wine on it or pour foundation for it." Dean's final words resonated long after the cameras stopped rolling. Madison Cartwright thought she was defending a dynasty. Instead, she lit the match that burned it down. Your legacy isn't what you inherit. It's what you build, who you lift, and how you respond when someone different stands in your space. Because in the end, dignity can't be washed away with wine, but privilege can disappear in a heartbeat. Justice may arrive late, but it never fails to appear.